Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Ewalt. I serve the Texas Tribune as Senior Director of Events and Live Journalism. Welcome to those joining us in person here in Corpus Christi and those joining us online for our conversation, Protecting Texas's Coastline. Texans enter every hurricane season fearful that they could face the next Harvey, Ike, or Rita. Residents have also clamored for action to protect the roughly 370-mile Texas coast and its communities. Much of the attention has focused on building the Ike Dike, a system of gates that would go across the mouth of Galveston Bay. Beyond that, the state's Coastal Resiliency Master Plan proposes improvement projects along the entire coast to help restore the natural environment. And in this Texas Tribune conversation today, we'll talk about efforts to protect our coast and what we need to know as we enter another hurricane season. We are joined today by Jim Blackburn, professor in the practice of environmental law in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at Rice University, and co-director of Rice University's Severe Storm Prediction, Education, and Evacuation from Disaster Center. Todd Hunter, Texas State Representative here in Corpus Christi. Kristen Schlemmer, Senior Legal Director and Waterkeeper for Bayou City Waterkeeper. And Kirsten Stanzel, Executive Director of Coastal Bend Bays and Estuaries Program. And moderating our conversation today is Alejandra Martinez, environmental reporter for the Texas Tribune. Our program will run 1 hour today with 45 minutes for conversation and 15 minutes for your questions. Here in Corpus Christi, we will have a mic stand set up right over there for our in-person audience. And our virtual audience can also submit questions online at our Q&A portal, texastribune.org/ask. That's texastribune.org/ask. We are grateful for the support of our sponsors. Our major sponsors today are Methodist Healthcare Ministries, Gulf of Mexico Trust, Texas State Aquarium, Lone Star Coastal Alliance, and CenterPoint Energy. And in addition to their wonderful support for today's program, Texas State Aquarium is donating a family pack of 4 tickets for those who are attending here in person in Corpus Christi. We will draw from the list of in-person attendees and let you know if you've won that 4-pack. Last note about sponsorship. Though corporate sponsors and donors underwrite this event, they play no role in determining the content, speakers, or line of questioning. We also want to thank the folks here at Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi for hosting us today. Here to offer a welcome on behalf of the university is Dr. Greg Stuns, Senior Executive Director of Heart Research Institute. Greg?
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to Texas A&M Corpus Christi. We're really pleased to have you all here. Our faculty and students and everyone here, shoreline issues are big to us, obviously, considering where we're located, but also to all the research programs that we have going on. I'm also representing the Heart Research Institute for Gulf of Mexico Studies, and I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience and many of our partners. Certainly, shorelines are near and dear to us as well in terms of a lot of research focus that goes on. Has to have healthy, sustainable shorelines in place to have all those functionings occurring. And so we spend a lot of time here at the university and the institute bringing the science to your teams so that you all are making difficult decisions about how do we protect those shorelines. You can rely on robust science to make those most informed decisions. So we're pleased to have you all here, and I'm looking really forward to what this panel has to say. And if we ever can help you out here at the university or the Heart Research Institute, please feel free to reach out, and you all have a very nice day. So thank you.
Thank you, Greg. I also want to thank all those around the state who make the journalism of the Tribune, including our events, possible by becoming a Texas Tribune member. To learn more and to become a member, you can visit texastribune.org/support. And I would like to mention here that tickets are now on sale for Texas's Breakout Politics and Policy event, the Texas Tribune Festival, which returns to downtown Austin from September 5th through 7th. Join us for 3 days of conversations about the issues that matter to Texans, including Texans here in Corpus Christi and all along the coast. At our annual celebration of Big, Bold Ideas, you can purchase your tickets at tribfest.org. And now let's get to know our panel. Jim Blackburn is an environmental lawyer and planner, as well as professor in the practice of environmental law in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at Rice University, where he teaches environmental law and sustainable design. He is co-director of the Severe Storm Prevention, Education, and Evacuation from Disaster Center at Rice, and a faculty scholar at the Baker Institute and director of the undergraduate minor in Energy and Water Sustainability. Representative Todd Hunter was elected to the Texas House of Representatives in 1988 and served 4 terms. In 2008, he returned to the House and is currently serving his 12th term. He chairs the House State Affairs Committee and has previously led the Redistricting and Calendars Committees. Kristen Schlemmer is the Senior Legal Director and Waterkeeper for Bayou City Waterkeeper, an environmental nonprofit organization based in her hometown of Houston. She's a lawyer who uses the law to secure water justice across Houston and the Texas coast by addressing industrial risks, water pollution and infrastructure failures, wetlands destruction and flooding, and inequities in climate adaptation and disaster prevention. Kirsten Stanzel is the executive director of the Coastal Bend Bays and Estuaries Program, a nonprofit focused on protecting the bays and estuaries of the Texas Coastal Bend. She has over 15 years of experience in developing successful environmental partnerships in the Coastal Bend. In her current role, she works closely with federal, state, and local agencies, other nonprofits, and private companies to increase public awareness and support for cleaner water quality and healthy coastal habitats. And Alejandra Martinez, our moderator today, joined the Tribune in the fall of 2022 as a Dallas-based environmental reporter. She was previously an accountability reporter at KERA, where she began as a Report for America Corps member and then covered Dallas City Hall. Before that, she worked as an associate producer at WLRN, South Florida's public radio station. I thank our panel and our audience for being here in Corpus Christi and around the state this afternoon. And with that, I turn the program over to Alejandra.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. What perfect timing to have this conversation as there is a tropical cyclone in the Gulf headed towards northern Mexico, and we are going to expect a lot of rainfall here in Corpus Christi. And as I was eating breakfast this morning at my hotel, there were 2 men sitting next to me, one born and raised in Corpus Christi and another one from Oklahoma, and they were talking about the weather that we're going to expect this week. And the guy from Corpus Christi was just basically saying, this is a way of life here. I mean, we know what to expect. If you don't get out of here now, get ready to bunker down, prepare, and stay here. And the guy from Oklahoma was like, well, I need to rebook my flight for today to leave immediately. And it really made me think about, not everybody knows what it's like to live in the coast. I grew up in Houston. I've lived through several hurricanes. But I've never really known coast life, really, and being so close next to the water. And I kind of wanted to turn to you, Kirsten, first. If you could kind of explain, I know a lot of our audience probably here is very familiar with this, but we also have people online from all over the state listening in. But could you explain to us a little bit about kind of the current condition of the Texas coast, either the biggest threats, vulnerabilities, challenges, and kind of like, you work here, you live here. What do you think about when you see this weather coming in?
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I see a lot of familiar faces in the room, which is nice, being the local representative here. It's interesting that you say that about people not recognizing the coast, because we always say that a lot of times people say that Texas has a coastline, but it's not a coastal state. You know, we just don't think of ourselves, the majority of Texans don't think of us as a coastal state. And so it is definitely challenging for those of us who do live in this area, you know, and there's a lot of us, right? You know, 6 million people or more live in this coastal zone. And so, you know, getting the rest of the state to recognize that, you know, when it comes to funding, when it comes to recognition, those kinds of things, it is extremely important. We have local representatives who focus a lot of effort on that. You know, Chairman Hunter has made that a big mission of his. But yeah, it's challenging. You know, there's a lot of things affecting our shorelines. You know, unfortunately, up and down the Texas coast, if you look at it, we have pretty high erosion rates, not just on our beaches, but our bay shorelines as well. And those are our barriers, right? You know, we are lucky in this region of the Texas coast to have a pretty robust barrier island system, but we've definitely seen in the last few years, in particular after Harvey and Hannah, right, that they're still recovering, and that takes a long time. And sometimes the changes that we've made in the landscape, whether it's, you know, damming up the rivers, there's no sediment coming down, the lack of fresh water, you know, that's making it difficult for them to recover. And so we have to look at other opportunities, restoration, beneficial use of dredging material, you know, to try to make sure that those habitats persist. And so there's a lot of work to do. It's expensive work, and so, you know, we're trying to play our part with other partners to do that.
Yeah, I see you nodding, Kristen, and I know we've spoken before about how population growth and industrial development along the coast plays into this. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I live in Houston. The organization I work for is based in Houston, but our work covers the lower Galveston Bay watershed. So it, you know, is inland, but then stretches out to Galveston Bay. And in that work, I'm a lawyer, a litigator by training, and so I'm often looking at things as problems that could potentially be litigated or not if it doesn't make sense to do so strategically. And so that's where I'm most frequently looking at our industrial risks and thinking about the topic today, and you know, thinking about our industrial risks in the context of climate change. That's where I'm just like very interested and engaged in that issue right now and trying to figure out solutions, including ones involving litigation, but ones that go beyond that too. And these, I think what really exemplifies these risks is like what we saw during Hurricane Harvey, and what we, you know, feared from Hurricane Ike, but which fortunately didn't come to pass, which is water flooding or surging over infrastructure containing toxic chemicals and ending up in our water, ending up in our communities, and posing a big threat to public safety and public health. I think what's been really interesting to think about when you think about these industrial risks in the context of climate change is the need to transition to cleaner forms of energy. A lot of the risks that we're dealing with right now are posed by the petrochemical industry, by the related plastics industry. And, you know, if we listen to experts, we're supposed to be transitioning away from fossil fuels over the next 20 years. And that's something that I think the law has a role to play in helping us with that. But that's also something we really need our decision makers on board to help create better policy to aid with that transition.
Speaking about climate change, I'm going to turn to you, Jem. Something you've told me before is the past is not a guide to the future. Can you speak a little bit about that and how climate change is expected to affect the Texas coast in the next coming decades?
Sure. Again, thank you for having me here today. I appreciate it. The problem with climate change is it is changing the statistics that we have relied upon really almost for centuries here on the Texas coast. To some extent, having experience living on the Texas coast may be your biggest enemy in the future, because you may not leave if a Cat 1 storm's coming in, and yet it might overnight turn into a Cat 4 like Harvey did. And in the Houston region, that will kill a lot of people. It will make a lot of chemical plants burp up, and you know, basically we could see the worst environmental disaster in United States history in the Galveston Bay area. We are incredibly vulnerable, but we are not prepared for these changes because we haven't talked about climate change publicly. We have been very closed-mouthed about it. It's been discussed behind closed doors a lot, but not a lot publicly. And our engineering tools are not appropriate. I think the way that we think about how we deal with these storms, about evacuation, rapid intensification, I have not heard discussed on any of the news channels leading up to this hurricane season, and I think that's the biggest risk that any of us face this coming year and in years to come, is not necessarily more storms, but bigger storms.
Yeah, and I mean, this hurricane season is expected to be one of the busiest. I mean, we're already seeing activity happening now. In a couple of hours, we're going to receive a lot of rainfall. So Representative Hunter, I know I've seen what you've been sharing on Twitter about preparation and emergency response, but listening to, thinking about that, but also listening to what Jim just said, Kristen and Kirsten, how do we make that part of the conversation as well, like the changing climate, and also how should Texans be preparing for not only this season, but the next coming ones as well?
Well, I'm just glad somebody cares about the coast. I've been in the legislature since 1989. This first time I've ever been invited to a panel that talks about the coast. It's how I feel in the legislature. I talk about the coast, and I want that impacted. The coast is a very, very natural, recreational location for not just Texans, but everybody. So I want to thank you for stressing it. But when you talk about the coast, there are other issues. When I first moved here in 1978, I had hair. The first thing I learned with 100% humidity, you cannot have good hair if you live in the coast. And so you all are worrying about the hurricane, Jim. I'm worrying about the mosquito cane that's going to come after the hurricane. Just so you know, I've represented most of the coastline during my years. I've been in Jackson County, I've been in Calhoun County, I've been in Refugio County, San Patricio County. I have been in Aransas County, I've been in Nueces County. I've worked with the first tier and the second tier. So, number one, here we've got a storm, according to the state climatologist, which I didn't even know we had. So I invited the state climatologist last week. Said this is going to be the worst hurricane season they know in the last 10 years. Now think about that. We already talked about Harvey. Think about your dunes, my surf riders out there. Think about how that's going to impact the area. If you're on Highway 361, local folks, how's it going to impact that roadway? My point is we need to be more active in supporting the coast. I am now on a mission to help the shrimp industry. I'm on a mission to help the oyster mariculture industry. We have groups in here that help the sea turtles. My district has the whooping cranes. We're the birdiest areas. Not only is that conservation, that's tourism. And so you got to protect the coast, and you got to care about the coast. You have UTMSI, University of Texas Marine Science Institute. You got Texas A&M, Corpus Christi here. We got the Hart Institute. You have Del Mar. Everybody's plugged in. But I get very, very rarely talking about the coast. And so, is there a change in weather? The answer is yes. But what we've got to do in the leadership arena is to quit making issues and focus on what's happening. And, I love the coast. I mean, I love the heat. I didn't move here for cold. I moved here to be in a hot weather zone. But when you have a tropical, whatever it's going to be now, Unfortunately for everybody in this room, that's the start of probably more activity. And the final comment, when you talk about my view and all that, I'm here when a hurricane hits. When Harvey was here, I was here. You don't realize that when there's no Wi-Fi, you can't use a cell phone, there's no water, your electricity goes off at 5 o'clock. And the scariest thing about living in a hurricane is when it's pitch black and your power's gone and it's midnight and you hear cars going around those neighborhoods. That's kind of a scary deal. So the coast is a great place. I'm glad you all came. I kind of wanted to expand the answer to your question to let you know that the input of folks here, I want to push you because I'd love to see more coastal issues coming. We say in South Texas, trabajando juntos hacemos las cosas, which is working together will get things done. And that's what I ask you to do.
You mentioned a lot of different groups and programs and people represented here, so thank you so much for coming. Representative Hunter, what are current policies or programs that people can tap into right now? Can you speak a little bit to that?
Well, one of them, if you're from the coastal bend, it's windstorm insurance. TWIA. You know, here you're all talking about the coast. People here can't afford to even live here anymore. Our insurance rates are higher than our property taxes. So people can get involved by working with our offices. But insurance shouldn't be a punishment. It should be a common sense program. Secondly, and they're my friends, and we've been friends forever, just because Neil and I have the same hairstyle. Surf riders, work with them. They got great conservation efforts. We had people trying to close the beaches. The beach is the public. The only people who own the beach is the public. The other thing that you can get involved in are conservation policies, water conservation. For example, I know we have industrial issues, which you've brought up, but a lot of people don't give the coast that we do a lot of good in trying to clean up the water with our recreational boaters. And we try to do things. So there's good things going on. What I would do is we have General Land Office here. I would be active with the General Land Office who oversees a lot of the beaches. TCEQ, you need to be active with them. Get involved with the aquarium, the Texas State Aquarium, the Texas Aquarium. They have the rescue center right here. If you're involved in sea turtles, start right here. Heart Institute. Jace, you are involved in all that. Those are 3 areas. And then if you're interested in oyster mariculture, the idea of oyster farming, get a hold of my office. Get a hold of A&M Corpus Christi, UTMSI. Get a hold of these groups. Those are some sources that you can get engaged. And there's more, but I want you to know who's here.
Yeah, thank you so much for pointing all of that out. You know, we've talked about the kind of risks, threats, challenges, but I wanted to move on to, and you kind of touched on this, like what are we doing now and solutions? And when I think about, you know, one that Matt mentioned at the beginning of the session was infrastructure projects is something that has gotten a lot of buy-in as a type of solution, most notably the Ike Dike, which is this massive system of gates that would go across the mouth of the Galveston Bay. And it's intended to protect the Houston region in particular from storm surge during hurricanes. And it's been proposed as like this one big solution to protect the coast. Jim, can you talk to us a little bit about, you know, the Ike Dike, what's going on and why we should be paying attention to it right now?
Well, I think the Ike Dike is one of the most fascinating projects that I've run across. It came up after Ike. Bill Merrill over at Texas A&M Galveston is sort of the architect of the original thinking. As currently proposed, there's a large gate across Bolivar Roads where the ferry runs that's proposed. They're proposing to build up sand dunes to 14 feet on both Bolivar and on the west end of Galveston, proposing to put a backside levee around Galveston, and also 2 gates in Galveston Bay, one up on Clear Lake and the other one on Dickinson Bayou. It's currently proposed as a $52 billion project. But I think the thing that to me stands out the most is it's really only built up to a Category 2 storm. And that's because the Corps of Engineers methodology will not allow beyond that in terms of you look out 50 years for the benefits that they are allowed to accumulate. So it's really not set up for a Category 3, 4, or 5 storm. And I think that is what has struck me the most, as well as the potential impacts to the bay that have not been fully articulated or really figured out. I've been working with Galveston Bay Park Plan in the Speed Center, which is an in-bay solution that would substitute for the 2 gates up on Dickinson Bayou and would put a 25-foot barrier from the Texas City levee all the way up the channel over to Chambers County. That project is probably a $6 billion project and I think will be a wonderful complement to the work down on the coast. But I think what the point I want to make here is the public tools that we have. We're private sector at Speed Center. We can plan for what storms we think we need to plan for. The government methodologies that are being used are out of date. They're not keeping up with climate change. So the storms that I'm most concerned about are really not in the planning book for the Corps of Engineers right now. And I think that is a huge issue. And it goes to this question about we're not really prepared for the change that's coming. And if we're not, we're going to be building obsolete projects.
And you're speaking about higher category hurricanes.
I'm talking about categories 3, 4, 5, and I think they're even talking about possibly a category 6 these days. So, I mean, there is a real worry about how big these storms will get and how fast they will get big. And I don't think we have really thought about that risk as much as we should, because I think it will affect everything, and certainly insurance, Representative Hunter, because the insurance agencies know more about climate change than anyone, and these prices are reflective of what they consider to be the true risk. And it's a horrible reality for coastal residents, but I think it is reality.
Mm-hmm. And Kristen, I know Bayou City Waterkeeper has kind of pushed against this project. Can you share a little bit about what are your concerns regarding the Ike Dike?
So I don't know if Jim said this, but the timeline for this project is 20 years. And that's if it overcomes funding hurdles. It's currently valued at $57 billion. Last year, I think it was at $36 billion. The year before, it was in the 20s. So it is the cost is escalating. And then this 20-year timeline is really disturbing too when you consider the risks it's trying to protect against. So engaging with these questions have led me to ask, what could we do sooner with $57 billion? And I don't have a great answer to that, but where I have sort of looked at this is sort of breaking it up into 3 timelines, or 3 questions really, which reflect different time periods to consider. One is what are the harms that already exist that we know are creating risks for us now? That takes us back to the industrial risks that I mentioned before. But this also takes us to risks that are created from developing in places that we really shouldn't be. In Houston, where I live, I'm often thinking about the 100-year floodplain over, wetlands and prairies. We're continuing to put homes there, and then we continue to see flooding increase. On the coast, I drove here from Galveston today, where I'm spending the week with my family, and I saw development all the way down from Galveston to Freeport, which wasn't always there. And thinking about the topic today, I was wondering, why are we continuing to put homes right up against the coast? I understand the ones that are already there, but why the new development? And that brings me kind of to the next question or time period I'm sort of thinking about is what do we do over the short term? What can we do over the next, let's say, 5 years? And one of, part of the answer is like the things I just talked about. Well, maybe we stop developing immediately on the coastline. We stop developing in our 100-year floodplains. We start to enforce environmental regulations against facilities because they're not being consistently enforced. The Biden administration has sort of taken some steps, or has taken some steps toward reducing industrial risks over the short term by putting a pause on approvals of new LNG terminals, but that came too late for us in Texas. There's already been approvals for terminals, and projects are moving forward. When, in my opinion, I think we should be phasing out our dependence on oil and gas. The other thing that the Biden administration has done is it released the new 5-year plan for drilling or for oil and gas leasing offshore in the Gulf of Mexico. And they've only included 3 leases or 3 proposed leases in that 5-year plan. That's a dramatic reduction from the previous 5-year plan, but it's still 3 massive leases. I'd like to see that closer to 0. And that brings us, so those are kind of the shorter term things. It's kind of like I don't even want to call it low-hanging fruit because those are not easy things to do. But they are things we know these create risks for us, so why do we keep doing them is kind of the point of what I'm saying there. But that brings us to the longer term question, and maybe this is where we can get back to the Ike Dike. Which is like looking 20 years from now, 50 years from now, like what is the future we're building toward? And when I look at the Ike Dike, I know that Jim has good data that shows that the Ike Dike doesn't protect us from industrial risks along the Houston Ship Channel like we hope it would, especially when you're looking at those Category 4, 5, 6 storms. But that's where I start thinking about a clean energy transition. Putting an Ike Dike in place, it's being put there purportedly to protect us from a major spill along the Houston Ship Channel. But if we do what we're supposed to be doing over the next 20 years, we could do a lot to clean that up and to limit the scope of our risks over that timeline. And that kind of leads me to ask the question, like, would we need an Ike Dike at the end of those 20 years? Or could we get by with something that's smaller scale if we're very actively doing what we need to do?
You mentioned some of Jim's ongoing research. You've been working on some modeling kind of showing what Category 3, 4 hurricanes now could impact, like how those could impact the Houston region. Can you kind of illustrate that for us just to hone on that point that you are making about storms now and future storms?
Sure. The storms that we're most worried about is a storm that comes ashore, say down around San Luis Pass or Freeport, where the dirty side of the storm comes right up into the Galveston Bay system, comes right up, if you will, against the Ike Dike. The Corps has identified that the sand dunes that they're going to build will basically collapse once they're overtopped. We're looking at surge along the coast in the 20 to 24 foot level. Once, the Galveston seawall is proposed to be raised from its 17 foot to 22 foot. So a 24 foot surge goes over the top of that seawall, even if it's made larger. Once you get into Galveston Bay, even if you have the barrier across Bolivar Roads, there will be sufficient water in Galveston Bay to generate a surge up into the channel. With a mild Category 4, you'll be about 22 feet up into the Houston Ship Channel. Most of the channel is protected to about 15 feet of elevation, which was a little bit above what we got with Ike, which basically missed Houston, but still caused $25 billion in damage. But we're looking at 20 to 25, 27 feet of surge with the Ike Dike in place. And I think that's what's particularly concerning is I think many will think that we will be protected and will think that they don't need to be prepared. I think that's a risk in the future. I think in the short term, I'm worried about no protection. And the fact that, we're going to see, a surge that would have massive damage. If Ike had hit where it was originally proposed to, which was down in that San Luis Pass region, turned out Ike was only a Category 2 storm, but had a Category 4 surge. And they'd never seen that before. After Ike, the Weather Service has changed, and they now are predicting both category and surge height as two different parameters because of that phenomena, which is the stuff we're learning about these storms. But most people did not evacuate for Ike. And if Ike had hit where it was supposed to have hit, the estimates I've heard is from 2,000 to 6,000 people would have died. Now, that is scary. And that has to do with what we can do now, which among other things is a excellent evacuation plan and frankly, good information about where you're building. I mean, what Kristen is talking about, the risk associated. In Houston, we have never been serious about regulating floodplains. Never. Floodplains have been a red tape and an obstruction as opposed to information to help us build a healthy, safety place. That is, I think, our biggest problem is we're not recognizing these risks and talking about them, regulating about them, and frankly, living as if they are real. We pretend they are not serious. They will kill us. They will destroy our industrial base. And if these storms come, it will be horrific in the Houston region. Down here, you survived Harvey better than one would have thought with a Cat 4, but the rainfall was what everybody saw. But it's the surge that I am most concerned about, and that's going to be the real devil that's going to come to the coast. And I love this coast, but this is the real part of it, and you've got to understand it. And I'm not sure many of our people understand it.
Yeah, Kirsten, you had something?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I mean, so we have a lot of Coastal Bend residents here, obviously, and, if you look at the coastal barrier system that's proposed, there's interestingly is a gap of any project in our region. We do not have one single project in the Coastal Bend that is in that barrier system. And so we're essentially left as a collective group to decide what we think are the best strategies and the projects that we need. And we as an organization, and many of you in the room, have advocated to get those in the GLO's master plan. So they're in there, and they're captured in a document. But, it's just interesting to see the difference, and probably part of that is because, as I mentioned before, we do have a pretty strong barrier island system, right, compared to a lot of places on the coast. But, I'm a resident of Port Aransas. I live on a barrier island. I know I signed on for the risks. I've lived through Harvey now. I shoveled saltgrass out of my garage. I had multiple feet of water, bay water in my garage. And so it's, it's challenging, but, the things that we need to do, those wetland habitats that we have now are so valuable, recognizing as a group, that we need to conserve what's there. We need to restore what's been lost. Those are the things we can keep working on, and make sure that we're maintaining those. And, we've talked a lot about people and impacts and things, but there are parts of our coast that are less populated, that can't be forgotten, right? We have a project right now with some engineers in the room looking at the north end of Matagorda Island. Matagorda Island, nobody's living on it. You would think it's a great place, right? Well, the north end is suffering from some of the highest erosion rates on the entire Texas coast. We're losing the entire dune system right now. So we're trying to look at opportunities to restore that shoreline. What sits right behind that? The little town of Port O'Connor, right? Where everyone wants to go and fish and enjoy the resources. And so, I just bring that up because I think it's interesting for this Coastal Bend region that we really do have to advocate for ourselves because of the fact that, we're not part of that barrier system as it sits right now. And so those projects that we've identified, looking at what's going on Mustang Island, why are our erosion rates so high there? We need to keep doing those things. And it's not going to cost hopefully $52 billion, but it is, I'll take that $52 billion. I can put it to a lot of really good projects, but it's, we are talking about very expensive things. And so I also think the other point I wanted to make is that I think we have to think creatively about partnerships, right? So we have relied a lot on government funding. We have a lot right now, to be honest, the infrastructure money that we're getting, the IRA funding, there's a lot out there to draw upon right now. And so we need to capitalize on that as much as possible. But I think, we can't get so streamlined in that. I think public-private partnerships are going to be a really, really important avenue to explore as we move forward. As these barrier islands protect these industry partners, I think there's a desire there that they want to give back and they want to work on those systems that are in place. And so I just think we need to really focus on that and building that out as a tool that we can use to hopefully fund and put some of these projects on the ground.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that because, the Ike Dike is in reality for the upper coast, right? But you mentioned the price tag of that project. So I wanted to turn to you, Representative Hunter, to talk about, like, in a world that you might have just this bucket of money, would you want something for your district in the area that you represent similar to the Ike Dike, or hone on what Kirsten is talking about here, these public-private partnerships, more of these like nature solutions, so forth?
I want all the coastal money. Bring it on. Just send it to the coast. It's our time to share. First of all, the project you're talking about, it doesn't affect our area of the coast. This is primarily upper coast from us. I support any of your projects that will help. I don't know all the details, but I support all efforts if you're trying to help the coast. So I know there's a federal aspect, and I know there's a state, and it impacts some local. So I would encourage everybody to get involved. I will help, but that really doesn't impact my zone, where I think my zone needs help. So I have my Port Aransas right here. Well, I remember when it was just a small town. And if you've been on 361 from Port Aransas to Padre Island, think about all of you who've been going to Port Aransas all these years. That's not even a lighted highway. Go look on a Sunday morning coming off 361. I hate to use this reference, but it looks like downtown Austin on the highway. So I would like to see more funding for safety and the transportation network for families, and we need lighting, especially at night. That's one thing. Two, I would like to see more funding with some of our agencies for turtle rescue. Oysters. The shrimping industry is going to need a lot of help. That not only helps the local economy, but it also helps the state. But I also think we're going to have to look at a state catastrophe plan involving emergency management. What are the wildfires? I was just out there on that investigative hearing. It's a land hurricane. As you said, Jim, we're getting priced out of the market so you can't even live anymore. We're going to need to look at maybe funding resources for emergency management, meteorology, the idea of fires, hurricanes, winds, tornado, hail. The insurance factor comes in on that. So I think that's some area that I think we should. Overall, I am big on the beach cleanup. And I think we need more funding for a lot of the local communities that want that funding to protect it. And then this area, as you all know, we got funding and help on the rip currents, which is out to save lives up and down the coast. So even though I'm not plugged in directly in the project, I'm always going to help the coastal regions. But those are some areas where I would like to see funding come in, and I think you hit it. Pretty soon from the federal, state, and local, we're going to have to look at certain funding sources to handle the change of these storms that are coming out, because we need to be looking at the future impact on how they're going to hit our area. Because a lot of people don't understand, you get a big storm, it may shift the whole dunes around. You're going to change marine life. The livestock, it changes how you can drive. So the whole area gets reshaped. So don't know everything on the specific project, support you all. But those are some areas where I would like to get funding to our region.
Yeah, if I could just mention one other thing. Another thing I'm concerned with, and very much along the lines of what you're talking about, Representative, is there's also, I think, a danger to our natural environmental system. I think, Kirsten, you were mentioning this, but sea level rise will drown our marshes. We could lose our coastal marshes. We could lose our coastal fishery. We've got to have a plan to address this. We've got to be understanding the types of changes we're looking at, not just hurricanes. We're talking about all aspects. You're talking about the firestorms and things like that. We are in a new reality here that we have not begun to, frankly, understand, much less develop solutions for. So I support your catastrophe planning. I think that we're going to have to totally rethink kind of how, not only here on the coast, but up in the hill country, out in West Texas, everywhere, the reality is going to be very, very different.
Continuing that conversation around solutions, Kirsten, could you talk a little bit about the work that your organization is doing now regarding like coastal resilience and protecting the coast?
Yeah, so I'll try to keep it short.
Yeah,
There's a long list, but I think a lot of our efforts are focused on actual shoreline protection. We try to focus more on these nature-based solutions, like you mentioned.
Can you briefly define or describe what nature-based solution stands for?
Yeah. So trying to, instead of putting in a hardened shoreline, a bulkhead, if you will, or some kind of concrete structure, trying to go with a more natural shoreline that allows that opportunity for that marsh to kind of build out and in as it needs to. And so living shorelines is kind of the common term for that. So you think of things that you want, living things on those shorelines, right? Not hardened structures as much as you can. We do often, in our cases here, we have strong erosional forces here. So we do often have to put some kind of barrier, or rock barrier, things like that, but those provide opportunities for additional habitat growth for oysters and things. So it's still a living shoreline, if you will. But so we focused a lot of effort on that. We're doing we just completed installation of almost 3/4 of a mile of that breakwater in front of Nueces Bay, in front of property that we own, which is our other strategy, right, is to actually try to acquire and conserve habitat where that is still available. I think it gets more and more challenging in like the barrier island systems. We do, on Mustang Island, Port Aransas area have some opportunity for that still, but it's tough. I don't know, Galveston, there's efforts underway there, the Galveston Bay Foundation and other partners. But, so I think those are two big strategies. Jim mentioned, we recognize that sea level rise is happening. So as much as we can, removing those hardened barriers, giving natural shorelines the opportunity to migrate, but at some point your barrier islands only get so narrow, right? So we have to reintroduce some form of sediment at some point if we're going to grow them again. And so we do a lot of that on the beach side now already. But I think we're starting to see these erosional forces more and more on the backside of the islands as well. And that's very, very concerning because those marshes really soak up a lot of that flood water. And so we're hopeful to try to find some strategies to try to use that. We're getting ready to beneficially put several million cubic yards of sediment up in the Nueces Delta area, and rebuild some of the habitat that's been lost. But I mean, I don't know if people in the room know, we're talking about, 14 feet of erosion every year on a shoreline. So think about that. I'm 5'7". So, double me, and that's how far back that shoreline goes every year. And so every year we have to wait for funding. Every year we have to wait to get a permit. 14 more feet of erosion is happening, and you're losing that marsh, you're losing the beach. So it's, I don't want to scare people, but it's serious and it's timely. And so, it's great again to be having these conversations today and hopefully bringing awareness to those issues.
Yeah, and we're going to be going to questions in a little bit. So if you have a question that you would like to ask our panelists, if you could just go over there to where Matt is at, start lining up. I'm going to go to Kristen right now, but then we'll go to questions after that. Kristen, you also focus a lot on like these nature-based solutions and these efforts. And can you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing, but hitting on what Kirsten was saying about the hurdles with funding? And yeah, if you have anything to add after that, Kirsten. Yeah.
This is a little bit outside of my my role since I am more litigation focused, though we are, with other members of my team, we're looking at nature-based solutions. as solutions. And one thing that other members of my team have been really focused on is identifying sources of federal funding that have been made available by the Biden administration under the Inflation Reduction Act and other laws that have created unprecedented amounts of funding, and figuring out how to make sure our decision makers pull down these funds in a way that is equitable too. And with that, we've been building relationships with, or in communities that have felt the biggest impacts of flooding in Harris County. So that, even Harris County is coastal, but not necessarily a coastal part of Harris County. So not quite on point, but that's where we've been looking at it most.
Go ahead, Jim.
Let me just jump in. I'm also CEO of a group called B Carbon, which is a private nonprofit that is trying to bring money to nature-based solutions that will bring carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for private-public partnerships and for private capital to come into nature and to support. James Clemens is here with Earth Optics, and Earth Optics is a business about measuring carbon in the soil. And so we've had an opportunity with prairies, with forests, and particularly with coastal wetlands to take carbon dioxide out of the air and to engage in a market where there can be payments to protect the coast. And it's a whole new area of commerce that is, I think, emerging. It's quite exciting.
So like getting companies to rebuild shorelines for carbon?
Well, for example, Kirsten was talking about a living shoreline. Living shoreline can protect the marsh, and actually we think can prevent the sea level rise from having as bad of an effect, and hopefully will hold it over. A private company could come in, build a marsh, build a living shoreline, about $1.5 million, $2 million a mile, and then can get credits for the carbon that is protected, and then a company will pay for those carbon rights. And so private capital can be used to build the project, and then private capital comes to repay that cost, and you go to the next project. We'd like to see 1,000 miles of living shorelines on the Texas coast, and these are the types of plans and thoughts that we need to really take advantage of, because there's opportunities here that are really amazing.
Yeah, and I'd like to just add to that. I really appreciate what Jim shared for a few reasons, but one is it's just reminding us that nature-based solutions are, these things that we can build, but then also existing ecosystems. And I've encountered this a few ways. One is what I touched on earlier about trying to reduce our ongoing risks from development in places where we shouldn't have development. The Clean Water Act last year faced serious challenge when the Supreme Court reduced the way that it can protect wetlands. In Texas, that was all we had in terms of protecting wetlands was the Clean Water Act. It fortunately still applies on the coast. I've been looking at it actively. I've been seeing developments that it's unclear whether they're accounting for the Clean Water Act's protections for wetlands and Section 404 in particular. So that's been something that I've been working to identify and bring to the attention of the right agencies. And, one of the developments I've looked at is in a place that, if you look at sea level rise projections, it's going to be quite underwater. If you look at past storm surge, it's a very vulnerable place for storm surge. It's a vulnerable place for hurricanes. And so it's just an example of, when you look at wetlands and other habitats and protect them as a form of a nature-based solution to flooding and climate change, you're also keeping people out of harm's way. The other part of this that what Jim was sharing reminded me of is, when I'm looking at Clean Water Act Section 404, it really is like a development by development sort of look. And that's not enough. We need sort of these like bigger scale protections that are looking at, bigger acreage of habitat. And that's where I think local policy interventions could be really powerful. The last legislative session, though, the Texas legislature passed what was called the Death Star Preemption Bill. And while that's been legally challenged, it was working to really prevent local local entities from taking steps to protect us and to do the things I'm saying to better protect local habitats and prevent development of floodplains. And so that's a real challenge. I think we need our state to allow local innovation if they're not going to do it themselves. Or do it themselves. I really appreciated Representative Hunter saying that he thinks we need a state catastrophe plan. I think that's the exact kind of thing that we need, along with the other things I'm mentioning.
Thank you. And we're going to go to question and answer. So if you have a question, please make your way to the mic. And I'll go to you, Matt, in case there's any.
Great. So I also want to remind our online audience that they can ask questions at texastribune.org/ask. And I'm just looking to the room here. We have someone with our first question.
Good afternoon. My name's Betty Cranford, and I want to know what y'all's opinion is on industry coming in and taking away our coastline, along with the marshes and things of that, by building them out. There's currently some pending papers with TCEQ for a company to actually take away the marshlands so that it can build it up, so that they can build an industry there. I'm all for industry, don't get me wrong, but I'm also for protecting our areas. And we have ammonia, hydrogen, we have our desals coming in, but these things are taken away from our coastlines. And so I wish y'all could address that for us, please. Thank you.
Do you want to take this one?
Well, yeah, obviously there's a balance, right? We need industry, many of the people, in this community live and work for those organizations, and it supports a huge swath of our economy. I'm not for sure about which particular project you're talking about. Obviously, we hope that the right regulatory mechanisms are in place so that they would be required to mitigate for any damage. Typically that's done at a much, if you are impacting a wetland, you have to mitigate at a much higher ratio than what you actually impacted, and they have to propose a plan for that. So, again, it's a balance between trying to promote the right types of industries, making sure that we have good partners in this area that know about what's going on. I think that's always, as an organization, that's been our strategy. We always appreciate it when an industry partner reaches out to us early on in the process. That way we have an opportunity to talk to them about what are the concerns in their area? Are there water quality issues going on? How much water demand is there going to be? How does that fit into the increasing demand that we have for this region and maintaining a certain amount of freshwater inflow? So, that's as early as we can have those conversations is better, so we don't get to a point where there's a permitted project that's going to have that impact. So, that's my take. And
Yeah, I resisted jumping in just because I haven't had a chance to work on desal. I know there's we have a lot of issues in common on our part of the coast and the coast down here, but that's one that I haven't encountered yet. But I think it does go back to how we make decisions, like what we allow to move forward. I think that there's been I've been thinking a lot about what Jim said about we can't do things. This isn't exactly what you said, but this is another version of it, is that we can't keep doing things the way we used to do them. And I think one of the things that we've done for a long time is allow industrial development to happen even when it's causing harm to people and to ecosystems. I know this is easier said than done, but I think ecosystems and communities need to be at the center of our decision making. And if there's an industrial development that is causing us harm over the long term or short term, it shouldn't be happening. And so I can't speak to this particular development that you mentioned, but that's I think it's a real shift in our values that needs to happen. That it's going to be forced on us by climate change if we don't do it proactively.
Representative Hunter.
You've seen the Harbor Bridge. Well, I hope it gets finished, but you see the Harbor Bridge over there. When that Harbor Bridge gets completed, this whole area is going to be seen worldwide. So it's going to be a trigger to a focus on this area of the state. That's why a lot of the things you've said, you plan now, not afterwards. Second, there does need to be a balance. You had asked me earlier, what can folks do? Some of the groups that have been in the media have never spoken to me. And I have tried to tell everybody I know in the state, if you're going to come to the Coastal Bend, talk to the legislators if it has a state impact. Many do, and many ignore it. So as we go forward, if there's a project, reach out to your legislative delegation, because we may not know what you know. And some of them haven't even come in to talk with us. North Beach Community has done a very good job of communicating with me, and they're not even in my district. But I know the issue real well. And I know the frustration. But what I really don't like is outsiders pouring into here without talking to us before they lay all the groundwork. I think the community here, the coastal community, knows the coast more than a lot of folks that just show up and are looking at the economic side of it. And so I want to encourage you, don't just presume they've visited with us or talked with us. You come visit with us too. Bella's right here from my office. Come talk with us. Angie Flores is my chief of staff in Austin and here. Chrissy Romero's, call on us, because sometimes I learn more from you. The best laws come from you, not necessarily from other groups. But I wanted to add to what you said. There is some frustration. There's an environmental protection. There's a combining of an industrial community relationship. And there's a transparency issue sometimes. And I think if we were full transparent in what was going on, it might alleviate some of the concerns. But I do want you to know San Patricio, Aransas, Nueces, Calhoun in particular, have a pretty good conversation among themselves across the spectrum. But it's a good view, but just get ready. When that bridge opens up, it is going to bring in lots and lots of different issues, and we got to be ready for it. And we should plan it now, not later on.
Thank you so much for your comments, and thanks to all of you for coming here and educating us and telling us how we can continue to have these conversations about protecting the coast. Around for our panelists. And that marks the end of our conversation, but if you had a question for any of our panelists, I believe that they are sticking around for a little bit, so make sure to catch them before they go. Thank you so much for coming.
The Texas coast and Gulf of Mexico are on the front lines of change. New energy investments, increased demands on water, and shifting environmental conditions. Some Gulf Coast communities are unprepared, while others are investing in a more resilient future. A new era of rapid change demands a new model for conservation leadership. One that balances the realities of a growing economy with the rigor of science-backed solutions. The Gulf of Mexico Trust works closely with the Hart Research Institute for Gulf of Mexico Studies at Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi, and other partners to advance solutions that work for industry, communities, and the environment. At the Gulf of Mexico Trust, we believe that Texas leads the way.